So from here, I'd actually like to answer one or two questions that I've received on my show. And, this is actually really exciting for me because this means that people are actually starting to interact, which is a really big part of what the fun of this is and the appeal. So the first question I have is from L till 1, and this person is asking about my opinion on them taking Hope out of the Witchblade. So L 1 doesn't seem to really like it very much, but I'd have to say that I understand it in the area of Witchblade, and I really love it on the side of the Darkness. In terms of the Witchblade, I think one of the big things they wanted to do was have a little bit more freedom with the character. They wanted to get her out of the place that she's been for a long time, which is New York, so out of the job. And then the thing about losing Hope is, Hope is still around, and just because Hope isn't in the picture doesn't mean that she isn't still going to be at some point. And I really think that the whole idea of her losing Hope is going to eventually lead into a reunion at some point, and it's probably going to be a big deal. I think it'll probably be one of the next Topcow events that we have, inside the Topcow universe anyway. So inside the Darkness storyline, I think it's actually really interesting. Jackie has decided to take it upon himself to rewrite the history of the entire world, the entire universe, especially as it pertains to him. And he's decided to give himself everything that he's ever wanted. And, one of those things is, I guess being a mob type guy, one of the most important things is family. So he kept his daughter and he brought back the woman that he always wanted to be his wife. So he's got the family he's always wanted. But of course, things are going sour. And, they're all being corrupted, and it's all part of his own doing, whether he knows it or not. So this is a big part of it, and eventually I think, and I don't have any inside info or anything, this is just my own thoughts. I think that this is going to lead to probably a big deal at some point. This is going to be the big thing. He's going to have to bring Sarah back into the picture. He's going to have to explain what he did. He's going to have to explain who this is. Probably it'll all come back to Sarah, and there'll be some splaining to do, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. So I'm all for it. I think the current teams are doing a pretty good job, especially on the Darkness and Artifacts. Witchblade, I think, I enjoy it, but it's not as high impact as the other books. My favorite thing about Witchblade right now is I like the setup of her being in a new town, and I really like the connections they're making with the the Darkness and the rest of the Topcow universe, and how they're hinting that Sarah lost something like Hope that she isn't realizing yet. But we'll see. It's still new for the current team. So the other thing that I've been asked about is from Black Bolt and Richard Amvella from the Topcow message boards, and they really wanted to know about what I thought about the video games and how they were close or not close to the Darkness. I was originally going to save this stuff for a little while later down the line, but since they asked, why not deliver? So I haven't played the game as recently as I would have liked to, but I'll tell you what I remember from it, from both a story standpoint and from a gameplay standpoint. So story-wise, basically the story of the Darkness Video Game number 1, just talking about the first one today, we'll talk about the second one probably next time, is you have Jackie Estacado, and he works not for the French, well, is it still Franchetti? It is Franchetti, but it's not Frankie Franchetti. He works for his uncle Paul, or Paulie Franchetti. And in the comic books, Paulie took over for Frankie after Frankie died, and that was after issue number 40. That was when they restarted the Darkness onto a volume 2. And in the comic book, I didn't like Paulie as much as Frankie. He was cutthroat, but there was no history. There was no, the thing about Frankie is he was a real three-dimensional character. He was like a great guy when it came to his family and to Jackie, but then at the turn of whatever, he would become this crazy guy that you did not want to cross because, well, let's just say his nickname was, Kill the Children 2 Franchetti or something of that nature. So, and he had a lot of really good moments in the first series, and he was really, a really important part of the first, part of the series. So they completely wrote him out in the video game. They just went with Paulie. So Paulie basically, Jackie's basically framed for stealing from Paulie. He didn't do it. And Paulie is trying to teach him a lesson. And, these are all spoilers, don't forget. He basically kills Jenny in front of Jackie. Jackie kills himself. Don't forget, he also has inherited this darkness power, which is a little bit different than in the video game, but it's also, than in the comic book, but it's also pretty cool. And he doesn't have the armor like he does in the comic book, but he has these 2 demon arms, and he's got some different powers he can do, and he still has the darklings that pop up here and there later on. So anyways, after he kills himself, he goes to hell. This happens in the comic book at one point too, but it's done differently in the video game. In the video game, he ends up in kind of like this World War II reenactment thing where people just have to keep fighting forever or something like that. I didn't like it as much as, the hell that was in the comic book. In the comic book, hell was more like a place that everybody goes to, and when they found Jackie in hell, because that's where he went when he died, he didn't even know who he was anymore. He'd been driven to insanity. But in this, in the video game, he went to this World War II era. While he's there, he finds his father. That's another thing that's really different from the video game to the comic book. In the comic book, his father is described as being a real brutal hitman. He was like Jackie on steroids, and he was a guy you didn't want to mess with. In the video game, he's kind of like this nice guy. He feels a lot of regret for, the whole darkness thing. But yeah, and he tries to guide Jackie on how he can maybe, defeat the darkness or get home or whatever. So eventually Jackie finds his way out of hell. He goes back, tears Paulie a new one, and that's the most important parts of the darkness story. The story of the game overall was pretty good. It was enjoyable, and I think a lot of people really loved the game because of the story. It had a lot, it had emotion in it. It had some twists and turns. It was, it was like the comic book. It was different than pretty much everything else that was out there at the time. And even today, there isn't really much out there that's like it. So the story was really great.